December 17th, 1944, 0530, Honsfeld, Belgium. The cold air tasted like iron and sleep, and the engines of Germany's last great spearhead coughed, sputtered, and died. SS Obersturmführer Commander Joachim Peiper slammed his fist on the turret hatch, and the clang echoed through the pale dawn like a verdict. His driver, Unscha Weber, cursed down into the engine bay, and the Maybach would not take. The fuel gauge trembling at empty, the reserve dry, and what began as an offensive thunderstorm of armor and ideology stalled into a silence composed of frozen metal and the slow, sick realization that you cannot run a blitzkrieg on myth alone. Peiper climbed down through frost-crisp air and walked among the enemy's forgotten fortune. Rows and rows of American jerry cans stacked like graves or treasure. 50,000 gallons of petrol glittering in the weak morning light. And as his men pried seals and breathed high-octane benzene into the nostrils of Tiger engines, they tasted a truth worse than defeat. An opponent who could afford to abandon supplies was already fighting on a different axis of war, one measured not by courage or doctrine, but by pipelines and refineries. And from that single quiet depot, a whole strategic logic unraveled. 6 months earlier, Albert Speer had shown Hitler the arithmetic of collapse. Synthetic plants gutted by bombing, output collapsing from hundreds of thousands of tons to a fraction. Hydrogenation works operating at 10%, and Germany's entire petroleum tally in 1944 reduced to a scrap compared to American flows. And the Ardennes offensive, planned as the Reich's final play, hinged on a gamble. Capture Allied fuel to keep the great panzers moving. But the gamble collapsed into a cataclysm of logistics because the Allies did not fight from scarcity, but from surplus. While Major Friedrich Simon tallied the Panzergruppe's needs in gallons and found the math bitter, 4.5 million gallons to reach Antwerp, half delivered, half imagined. The Americans were building pipelines across liberated Europe, running the Red Ball Express round the clock, moving 12,000 tons a day by truck, pumping oil through Pluto under the Channel, and by December, the First Army was receiving more fuel than it could immediately spend, stockpiling reserves that rendered captured dumps near Honsfeld a curiosity rather than salvation. Peiper and his men celebrated at first with the hunger of those who have been starved, filling Tiger tanks, grinning, prying open manifests and stars and stripes dated 2 days before, and realizing the fuel had come from Texas to New York, to Liverpool, to Normandy, in a matter of weeks, the logistical chains of an industrial leviathan. And yet, as the morning wore on, the triumph curdled into despair, because the Americans were not merely well supplied, they were willing and able to burn what they could not hold. Captain John Brewster's engineers at Stavello, ordered to deny gasoline to the enemy at all costs, set jerry-can pyramids alight with white phosphorus and a match at 16:30 on December 17th, and watched 2 million gallons become an inferno that blackened the sky for days, a deliberate economy of abundance in which destroying fuel was a strategic act. And that inferno consumed more fuel than Peiper's entire division hoped to capture, turning the captured 50,000 gallons he had into an anecdote of futility. What Peiper had not understood until he read the shipping papers and saw the pipeline headlines was that while the Wehrmacht measured operations in liters and risked everything to seize them, the Allies measured victory in oceans and considered millions of gallons expendable in the calculus of denial. The Red Ball Express, hundreds of trucks on coded routes, brought fuel in volumes the German staff could not conceive. When traffic jams in the Ardennes forest chewed through hours and fuel, when a single 18-man reconnaissance platoon in Lanzarote delayed the spearhead for 10 hours, and the Tigers idled and drank petrol, or the column choked, the strategy began to dissolve into arithmetic. By noon on December 18th, Peiper's group had burned one set of figures and captured another, and the ledger did not balance. The column consumed far more than it gained, tanks guzzling gallons per mile in a terrain that increased consumption by 40%, supply lines stretched thin. And as the Germans pushed deeper, they discovered American depots at every crossroads, and a willingness to destroy rather than surrender their logistical advantage. Officers like Halmführer Hans Gruller later recalled the pyramids of jerry cans at Honsfeld, stacked 3 meters high for hundreds of meters, full of high-octane gasoline that confused as much as it tempted, because American 100-octane aviation fuel was a technological product the German fuel system could not easily use, and even caused temperamental Maybach engines problems. An irony that underscored not just numerical superiority, but industrial sophistication. While Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann's discovery of shipping manifests that traced the fuel's journey across oceans was a slow revelation that the enemy's production and transportation networks operated on a scale the Reich could not match. So the Germans took their prize and burned the hours and the kilometers and the gallons trying to reach the Meuse. But the Americans, monitoring ultra-intercepts, saw the arithmetic elsewhere and ordered every depot to be destroyed if capture was likely. And they did so with a leisure born of abundance. At Toipon, over 1 million gallons. At Spa, 2.5 million. At Stavelot, 2 million. All sacrificed to deny the Germans what they lacked and to demonstrate that the calculus of war had left Germany bereft. The result was tactical theatre and strategic collapse. Peiper's spearhead surged on captured caches, Billingen, Lingville, Stavelot. Yet for every jerry-can victory, there was a depot immune to capture, because burning it was cheaper than losing ground. And by December 19th, as tanks stopped for lack of fuel and crews abandoned vehicles with engines still warm, the Ardennes offensive's mobility collapsed into immobility and attrition. An implosion made visible in columns of black smoke and rows of abandoned armor. By Christmas, the Germans had lost tens of thousands of men, hundreds of tanks immobilized for want of gasoline. But more devastatingly, they had lost an illusion that courage could substitute for crude, that tactical brilliance could overcome industrial shortfall. This was not merely battlefield misfortune, but an epical mismatch of economies. America produced 1.8 billion barrels of crude in 1944, while Germany, with synthetic plants failing and captured fields a pale supplement, managed 33 million barrels, less than 2% of American output. While the Wehrmacht counted liters and rationed fuel to field ambulances and generators, American commanders requisitioned hundreds of thousands of gallons for offensives, and pipelines fed armies as if by magic. And the psychological effect on German soldiers was corrosive. Men who had been taught the doctrine of sacrifice now watched Americans casually discard or burn petrol, and felt their own cause's arithmetic narrowing to zero. Field Marshal Walter Model read the captured manifests twice and said, "We are not fighting the same war." And when photographs of Stavelot burning were shown to Hitler, his denial could not alter a reality encoded in production statistics and pipelines. The Ardennes campaign thus became a case study in industrial warfare, a demonstration that by late 1944, the decisive weapon was not the Tiger's 88 or the Panther's sloped armor, but the refinery, the tanker, the pipeline, and the convoy. And when Peiper looked across the jerry-can field at Honsfeld, he had an instant of clarity. The enemy's capacity to destroy millions of gallons rather than surrender them was proof positive that Germany could not win a war measured in tons and barrels. Tactically, the consequences were immediate and brutal. By December 21st, Peiper was surrounded at Elise, his tanks immobile, The spearhead disintegrated into foot soldiers and fugitives. 5,000 men sent into the Ardennes wood in November were reduced to 770 returning, and units that had begun with armored superiority ended the campaign with broken mobility, ammunition expended, and no fuel for escape. Strategically, the lesson was unavoidable. American logistics could support offensives no German economy could match, and the Red Ball Express, Pluto pipelines, and European refinery networks turned abundance into operational freedom, enabling Patton's pivot and Eisenhower's calm calculus, while German commanders measured every liter and found their strategy bankrupt. The human consequences trace across testimonies. Captain James Rose's diary, which notes fuel deliveries and storage at capacity just miles from Peiper's start. Private Ernst Kara, finding Stars and Stripes dated 2 days before. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann's crumpled manifests. The engineer Paul Soles throwing the phosphorus that turned Stavello into a day-long pyre. Each detail stitches into a single fabric of logistical supremacy that turned tactical encounters into a narrative of consumable resources. The arithmetic reads like a prosecution. Allies consuming 7.5 million gallons a day and receiving 8.2 million. Building reserves while fighting. The First Army receiving nearly 2 million gallons in a single day and adding to reserves even as depots burned. While German allocations for a decisive offensive were a few million gallons, and transport bottlenecks halved what was actually delivered. The mismatch was fatal. And yet, there is poetry in the ruin. The Tigers abandoned for lack of petrol became monuments to the end of romanticized mechanized warfare. Hulks sitting like tombstones in snow, fuel gauges frozen at zero, crews marching away because the greater engine of war had been strangled not by bullets, but by absence of oil. When Peiper and his staff tried to reconcile their courage with the arithmetic, some uttered a bitterness that would echo through post-war testimony. If we had run out earlier, Peiper later said, we might have retreated with dignity. Instead, they discovered that they had been fighting an opponent who could burn what they would die to possess. And recognition of that fact destroyed morale faster than any defeat in the field. Historians have since folded these facts into the larger thesis of industrial warfare. Dr. Richard Overy's calculations show Allied-to-Axis production ratios that by 1944 reached multiples impossible to overcome by operational ingenuity alone. And fuel was the most glaring metric. The United States petroleum output dwarfed the Axis, and where Germany tried to substitute synthetic fuels, the Allied bomber offensive systematically dismantled that substitute economy. The Ardennes thus stands as a parable. Great tactical skill and armored valor confronted a foe capable of making fuel a weapon. And logistics prevailed. Museums today display Peiper's Tiger at Liège with its tank stopped at the roadside, gauge empty. Visitors asking why such a magnificent machine lies abandoned. And the answer is almost absurdly modest. No petrol. An explanation that collapses the grandeur of armor into a ledger entry and reduces battlefield myth into industrial fact. The broader moral is blunt. In modern war, the refinery is strategic high ground. The pipeline is as defensible as any pass, and when you stand among jerry cans that an enemy can casually destroy, you understand that victory is not measured in medals, but in barrels per day, in spare parts, in standardized trucks, in the capacity to move tonnage faster than your opponent can consume it. Operation Watch on the Rhine failed not because German soldiers lacked devotion or valor, many fought and died with courage, but because they were ordered to wage mechanized war without the petroleum backbone necessary to sustain it. And when SS Obersturmführer Commander Joachim Peiper watched the flames rise from Stavelot, he saw not merely lost fuel, but the collapse of a strategy based on impossible premises. His men would pull scorched tanks into the forest, drain remaining liters for desperate use, destroy armor they could not drive home, and in that ruin, they would learn a lesson their leaders had refused to accept. Abundance defeats sacrifice. The aftermath rippled beyond December. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe was grounded for lack of avgas. Pilot training contracted. U-boats went to sea with battery restrictions. The German war machine stalled, and Allied forces rolled on, not always without cost, but with an inexorable supply line behind them. The numbers are stark and unforgiving. America refining 1.8 billion barrels in 1944, Germany struggling to assemble 33 million, including synthetic output. Allied monthly consumption measured in millions, while German allocations were rationed in thousands. And the arithmetic assures that even the most brilliant German operational maneuvers after 1942 were gestures of desperation against an industrial tide. In the cold afterglow of the Ardennes, Peiper's capture of American jerry cans became anecdote and warning. A single morning at Honsfeld, when he tasted high-octane gasoline and felt for a moment that the war could be pushed on by sheer will, and then learned that his enemy could burn entire depots rather than let them be turned over to German hands. And that realization killed hope faster than any Allied shell. The final irony lingers in the museum quiet, where Peiper's Tiger stands, with its gauge at empty. Visitors ask how such power could be idle, and the answer is infuriatingly simple. The world had run out of their fuel and filled its tanks with another nation's wealth. The Ardennes was therefore not only a battle of guns and ground, but a demonstration that in modern industrial warfare, victory adheres to the nation that can make and move and sacrifice materiel at scales the other cannot. And on that frosty December morning at Honsfeld, a young SS commander learned the most basic lesson of all. You cannot win a war if your adversary can afford to throw away what you would kill to take. On a freezing Belgian morning, a Tiger tank wasn't felled by shell or shell shock. It simply ran out of breath. And that mute, metallic heartbeat marked the moment industrial America strangled a blitzkrieg. On a freezing Belgian morning, a Tiger tank didn't fall to enemy fire. It died whispering on empty lungs, its engine choking on the last vapors of a war Germany no longer had the fuel to fight. Around it, 67 armored beasts sat frozen in place, not by courage or cannon, but by an enemy so wealthy in petroleum that it could burn oceans just to deny a single gallon. And in that moment, standing among abandoned American jerry cans, stacked like monuments to industrial power, even hardened SS commanders realized a truth no propaganda could hide. This war had already been decided in the factories, not the foxholes. What do you think? Did Germany ever truly have a chance in the Ardennes? Or was the Battle of the Bulge lost long before the first shot was fired?